Good evening. You're listening to Luscombe's Choice on Resonance 104.4 FM. This evening's choice is the first of a two-part series discussing a seminal techno album, Jeff Mills' Waveform Transmission Volume 1. His first album, and also his first outing as a solo artist, having left Underground Resistance. It was released in 1992 on Trésor, and set the tone for what was to become known as Detroit techno. I spoke with Jeff Mills earlier in the week, and this is what he had to say about the album. So I was just wondering, could you tell me a little bit about the concept behind the album?
As far as I can remember, it was an album that was really made from the few but kind of abrupt transitions that I was making at the time. I mean, I had just moved from Detroit to New York. I think this was maybe back in 1990, at the end of 90, maybe the fall of 92, I think. And I just moved from Detroit to New York, and I really didn't have much of a studio when I moved. I left a lot of equipment at the UR studio and office, and was gradually bringing pieces to New York every time I came back to Detroit. So I was making the album pretty much to have new music to play in New York at the Limelight at the time. So I was trying out a lot of different things, and would make it earlier in the day and then play it later on the night to somehow get some type of idea of what might work. And so if you can kind of imagine, I was in an apartment with no furniture, just a few pieces of equipment, and that's about it. And so and then also at the same time, I was still in contact very frequently with Trésor in Berlin, and was occasionally traveling back and forth from the U.S. to Germany. So it was a lot of movement and exchange of ideas and going to places, learning more about the people and things like that at that time.
Yeah, so I mean, although the music can sound quite abstract, you'd say that very sort of concrete life experiences influenced it.
Yeah, I mean, it really. I'm not sure if that album really reflected what was happening with techno music at the time, but at least I was moving around from place to place on behalf of techno. So it was. I was asked to come to New York because of the type of music that I was making, and I was DJing. So I think it was really the changes that I was going through, and I think that's probably the reason why the tracks are kind of not really the same. They're some tracks are more melodic, some tracks are much more darker. Some tracks are just more, I guess, experimental at that time, and I was really trying to figure out which direction to go in, and which was the best way to prescribe music for, in particularly the Limelight at that time.
And I mean, musically as well, what inspired you to make such original and unusual music?
It was unusual circumstances. I had went from Detroit, and for the most part, I had stopped DJing when I was still in Detroit, and was really working with UR. And I had quit radio in Detroit and was just making music at the time, and was in school and studying and things like that. And then going from there to New York, where I'm really right in the middle of the most extreme examples of I guess rave music at that time. I mean, there were really no limits, And so maybe the diversity and the nature of the album was really just trying to kind of grasp, what I got myself into. So I think that I had so after being in UR, I was again then kind of back on my own as a producer, and I suppose at certain times on some tracks I kind of went back to, in some way, kind of more of an industrial type of feel and sound, which is closer to the band that I was with before I joined UR, which is a band called Final Cut. And with those tracks like Berlin and the Hacker and things like that, I think that I was maybe wanting to kind of create this atmosphere, this much more psychedelic, more jungle type of, this kind of lethal type of feel and type of sound to some of the tracks.
Well, funny enough, the Hacker, that was one of my questions. I was going to ask, with songs like that, were you kind of attempting just to make some of the hardest techno possible?
Well, I mean, it was again, that was really reflective of the time in New York. It was very extreme. It was a very hard, not abrasive type of atmosphere, but it was very extreme in all senses. So visually, sound, just the people, and just how it was and so. And then I remember, the title actually comes from I think I read an article about how because computers were kind of new at that time, and people were beginning to hack into other people's mainframes and things like that, and I remember reading something about that, and that kind of gave me the title for that track.
Well, some people, describe techno as machine music, but I find particularly the music that you make and others of your kind of genre was very funky. Would you say funk music was in any way an influence on what you were doing?
Well, that's something I don't quite know how to. I suppose that it's just a reflection of my personal style, I guess. I don't try to make the music funky. I just try to make it so that it makes me feel more comfortable, and then once I get that that notion that it's got that rock to it, or it's got that sway to it, or it's at that point, then I don't touch it anymore. It's there. I can hear a common link between all the tracks that I make, but where exactly it's coming from, I'm not exactly sure. But and that's.
Well, that sounds like quite an intuitive approach. Particularly with techno and stuff like that. Is there any kind of songwriting process, or is it just sort of trial and error till you kind of get to where you want it to sound?
Well, yeah, it's a trial and error process. I'm constantly making music for various reasons. Some compositions end up being officially released. Probably most of the things that I make are only being made because I need to make it so that I can kind of study it, and then the next track or the next thing that I work on, I've learned something from those tracks. So I guess most of the time it's just making examples and sketches, or if someone were to make notes, and then they would take all those notes and then eventually produce something that's accumulative of all that. And so it's an ongoing process, and but it's not the production of making music isn't the only thing that I'm constantly. I mean, I'm constantly looking for subjects in which to make music for.